And in some ways, I think I had some judgment from that I had invented for myself over the years that wasn't serious enough. It wasn't artisty enough. I needed to be a serious artist. And what I noticed in that week when I sat down to work out which idea to use is the only one that really felt fun and that I felt like I wanted to run with it was this idea for this romantic comedy novel.
And we're live. Woohoo! And this week we have the amazing Laura Ives, which is not your real name, but it's your
It's
author
not.
name. So
It's my pen name, yes,
welcome
indeed.
to the show, Laura.
Thank you very much, Tim. Very good to be here.
So I have I have met you in the UK and in Las Vegas for
Yes.
various writing and author events. And you struck me with your amazing personality, but also I've known people who've read your book who've said it's very, very good. I'm obviously not somebody who reads much romantic fiction, and I've not got round to reading your book yet, but I've been told it's awesome. So tell us about your book, and it's called Lie for Me. I was looking at the
Yes.
title, and
Yeah.
really what's it about, and this is your first book, so also talk a little bit about how you got into that project, how you actually got started.
Yeah, of course, of course. So yeah, my first novel, romantic comedy novel, is called Lie for Me, and I suppose I'll start. I'll tell you a bit about the book in a moment. But how I got started, I was thinking about this quite a lot recently because I'm coming. I'm in the middle of book two. It should be out in the autumn. And the reason I've been thinking about how I got started so much is because book two has been so different in terms of the process. And what actually happened with book one is like so many writers, I had been wanting to write and trying to find my way in to sitting down to do that bigger project for years, to be honest, in one way or another. And there were all sorts of reasons I told myself about why it wasn't happening. I'm too busy. I need to do another course or whatever it was that rolled on year after year. And then eventually I realized that what was really holding me back was I I didn't have a lack of ideas. I just needed to pick one
Yeah.
and focus on it instead of firing off all over the place, waiting for some sort of God-given sign that this was the idea that was going to be the right idea and make me my fortune and all the rest. So one day in May last year, so May 2023, I had a chunk of time in between contracts for work. And I said to myself, right, you've got 3 or 4 ideas that you've done a certain amount on. Now is the time to sit down and interrogate those ideas a bit more and figure out which one you're actually going to write. And just pick one and then go for it. And what happened is I pulled up those 3 or 4 ideas. They were very different from each other. One of them was a dystopian fiction novel, and none of them was the book that I ended up writing.
Oh.
So somewhere in that week or so that I sat and I had flip chart paper on the walls and I was writing bullet points and pulling up old notes and chapters from here and there. And then somewhere, and I couldn't tell you where or when, but somewhere, just the idea came to me to just I think the characters I think came to me. I think I could hear dialogue. I could feel the characters and I could hear the dialogue, and it just felt fun. None of the other books was not only were they not this story, they weren't romantic comedy. They weren't romance novels. And if I'm really being honest, I think there was a part of me that had resisted writing romance over the years because I think I had, even though I've read loads and I love romance, and my shelves, I'm looking at them now, are full of romance of different
Yeah.
sorts, different subgenres. I felt like in some ways, and I touched on this with you just now, Tim, my background is working in theatre and now I work in film and TV. And in some ways, I think I had some judgment from that I had invented for myself over the years that wasn't serious enough. It wasn't artisty enough. I needed to be a serious artist. And what I noticed in that week when I sat down to work out which idea to use is the only one that really felt fun. and that I felt like I wanted to run with it, was this idea for this romantic comedy novel about a woman who has to go to a dreaded family wedding and spend 3 days with the family she spends the rest of her time avoiding. And she asks a friend to go with her and pretend to be her boyfriend because she needs a buffer.
Yeah.
Um, and the scenes, so much of that first book, so much of the dialogue just came out really easily. And this is where I was thinking about the difference between the process for book one and book two. Book two, lots of it still was quite organic, and because I'm quite a discovery writer, but it's a much messier draft than book one. Book one was quite, chunks of it were quite clean. They, even through the edit, they didn't need to change very much. But book two is just reams of reading. So yeah, so that's how I got started, and I think it really was that thing of sitting down and saying you just have to pick an idea. Turned out the idea I ran with wasn't even one of the ones that was sitting there on the slate, if you like. But just telling myself, just pick one. There's no wrong idea. It's just they're all fine. Just choose one to progress with. That's how it all got started.
Okay. So let's talk about Lie for Me. What happens in it without giving it? Give the soupçon of little bit of like
Yeah.
just enough to get everybody like interested in what it is, but
Mhm.
not give the excitement away. What happens in the
Yeah.
book?
I mean, like with romance, it's funny because in some ways, I think if it's a good romance book, we sort of know what's going to happen at the end,
Yes.
or we've really let our readers down.
Yeah.
But the premise is that Lucy has a life that she loves. She works in a stately home, um, looking after volunteers and visitors and running all these kind of amazing creative visitor programs. She absolutely loves her job. Um, and she's moved quite a long way away from her family, for a good reason. As you meet her family, you realize that they are, let's say, they're probably well-meaning but very judgmental,
Yeah.
and she hasn't really lived up to what her parents feel, she what their expectations are in terms of having a job that conveys status and money and things like that. That's how her mother in particular assesses somebody's success. So when she has to go and spend 3 days with them for her brother's wedding, she's just absolutely dreading it. She feels sick. She also doesn't always tell her parents what's going on in her romantic life because, again, it's a disappointment to her parents that she's not yet settled down like her siblings have. So, and she had told her mother about a relationship a little while ago and then hadn't got around to telling her that they were no longer together because, again, just wanting to escape her mother's wrath,
Yeah.
basically. So, when the wedding comes up and she has replied with a +1, she's a short time out from the wedding and thinking, I can't tell my mum that now it's just me.
No.
She will have an absolute fit. So she persuades her friend Jack to go with her to the wedding and pretend to be her boyfriend, and they have
Mm.
this fantastic relationship where there's, I think that one of the highlights for the book and some of the feedback that I've had from readers is they just love that relationship between Lucy and Jack in terms of the banter and the playful relationship they have, the way that he looks out for her and looks after her. Um, and quite a few readers have said that they fall for Jack a little bit, and it's what I wanted to write, and what I'm continuing to write with book two is I wanted to write something that was really relatable.
Yeah.
So I've read some amazing, darker romance books and billionaire romances and things, but for me, I wanted to write a book where I felt I could meet all these people in the local pub. Um, for better or for worse. Some of them I might not want to meet, but they would be people that you would feel like, yeah, these could be walking around in my life. These are very relatable characters. These are very relatable friendship and familial relationships. And again, that's what's really good. That was my goal, is that's some of the feedback I've had as well, is that it's really relatable what these characters are going through and those different relationships. Um, so that's what the book's about, and then we follow them on the 3 days as various things. It's a romantic comedy.
Yeah.
They find themselves in some awkward situations. Obviously, everybody around them thinks they're together, so they have to act like that. And I have to say, I love these, I think for my first book, I wrote two of my favourite tropes. I think Friends to Lovers is such a great trope
Yeah,
because to me, in many ways, there's more at stake because you would lose twice. If it goes wrong, you lose twice. You potentially lose the prospect of that romantic relationship, and you might lose your friendship as well. So it's almost, in some ways, there's more to lose than with some of the other tropes, I feel. And the other thing is, I love a fake relationship because there's so much scope for awkwardness and having to, remember what it is you're supposed to be conveying to other people, and then you start wondering where the line is, and that's
yeah,
really what the book is about. So it's called Lie for Me, and it's the tagline is, "Will a lie unlock how they really feel?" Because as the book goes on, the line between truth and pretense is increasingly blurred. Um, and then they have to figure out, as things go a little bit wrong, exactly how they feel, and if somebody can speak up and do something about that.
yeah. Well, I know with the tropes of these things that I'm guessing works out okay in the end. So, I mean, this is one of the things I hang out with you and other romance authors and people. There's so many tropes and things in the romance world. I was totally like, well, I mean, you kind of know there's got to be a happy ending. Usually, I mean, are there any romance books without a happy ending, or is that just like totally for verboten, so to speak?
I would say that there are, outside of genre fiction, there would be romance stories that don't have happy endings. I
Yeah,
mean, the one that immediately comes to mind, because it's been quite popular recently, is something like One Day. But then I wouldn't say that's a genre romance novel. That's a literary fiction book that is a romantic story.
yeah,
In terms of genre romance, I would say no. If you do not deliver, you have to deliver one of two things: an HEA or an HFA. So an HEA is a happy ever after,
yeah.
and an HFA is a happy for now,
Oh, yeah,
or HFN, sorry, happy for now.
yeah,
Um, and personally, I quite enjoy books that are HFN, happy for nows, because for me, there is enough of a promise in that we believe that these people who've now finally sorted things out and got together, and we've had that kind of final reconciliation scene or whatever it is that's happening, I trust that that will go on and blossom into something. But actually, a lot of readers prefer that it is a solid happy ever after with an epilogue that
yeah,
that backs that up, and the epilogue anywhere from sort of 6 months to, well, not doesn't have to be 6 months, but typically sort of 6 months to a couple of years after we leave the characters in the main part of the story, just to show that the happy for now, which is probably where we got to in the main part of the story, is then cemented into a happy ever after in the epilogue. And I did have to add an epilogue into Live for Me because I left it on a happy for now, and my editor said, "No, you can't do that. You need to write an epilogue. You need to make sure people know it's a happy ever after." And what was really fun is, oh, I was really quite resistant, but I took her advice. She's my editor.
yeah,
I wasn't going to ignore her expertise, but I did it sort of begrudgingly, thinking, and I thought to myself, well, I'll do it, and then at the end of the day, I can just not include it in the book. It doesn't, because it's an epilogue, it in no way interferes with the rest of the
yeah.
story. I could just cut it out. And then I wrote it, and now it's one of my favourite parts of the book.
Oh, okay.
And it's also, interestingly, given my initial reluctance, I don't think that it really had much of an edit other than a kind of a proofread.
Yeah,
It came out in a first draft, and it's pretty much in its form in the final book. And again, it went back to the editor. She checked it. She gave me feedback. But the epilogue was, yeah. I don't know if I'll ever have that experience again of not wanting to write something and writing and it being absolutely fine, and I'm ultimately very happy with it. But it was happy that happened.
yeah. Okay. So I noticed on your Amazon, I did some research for once. This research, where we go. But I noticed on your Amazon author bio, it mentions your love of Pride and Prejudice.
Oh yes.
So from your with your analytical hat, why do you think Pride and Prejudice has been such a successful like romantic book over the years? What is there about that particular storyline that resonates with people?
Well, I think first of all, it's the ultimate enemies to lovers, really, isn't it?
Yeah,
Because they really dislike each other, and then and I think so. There's so first of all, you've got enemies to lovers. You've got fantastic secondary characters who really create a very rich world in the day-to-day lives of Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy, and characters like Mrs. Bennet. I mean,
yeah,
she's absolutely fantastic. And I think as well, you've got. I was. I think one of the things that is wonderful about Pride and Prejudice is, firstly, the things that happen, the things that he does for her. That when Lydia, and I
yeah.
can I can talk about this, can't I?
Yeah, I think
You
you're
know,
in that.
when
I think it's like, I mean, it's like anybody. Well, anybody. Spoilers to anybody who hasn't read, hasn't read it.
so things like she's what's lovely is she starts to see him in a slightly different light
Yeah,
and recognizes her own prejudice, if you like, when she hears other people talk about him. So, for example, hearing the housekeeper talk about him when they visit Pemberley, and then seeing him when he's at home and around his staff and around people in his own home, and then when Lydia elopes with Mr. Wickham, and he is so kind to her and
yeah,
so understanding, and then everything he does to try and right that situation for her is so incredibly powerful. And and I think it's that. So I think that's part of its success, and I think it's also, it's their exchanges. There are some fantastic exchanges. It's a sparky novel, um, and they both go through a transformation. So they both go through an emotional transformation to get to a point where they are able to be in a relationship. So there is, because of course, romance novels, the transformation doesn't necessarily happen externally in terms of plot, it happens internally for the characters. And they both go through quite a transformation to realize and be able to admit how they feel for each other. And I think that lots of people relate to that theme as well, the struggle to overcome, and the struggle to then be able to speak up. That's something, again, in life for me. Part of what happens there is once they realize how they feel, it's, can anybody be brave enough to say anything?
yeah,
And you get a little bit of that when Elizabeth is in that final conversation, or not final conversation, but conversation right near the end, when she is trying to express her deep gratitude to him, and he is trying to then understand how she now feels about him. So and I think one of the things as well is that I think sometimes TV and film, not to criticize TV and film, not
giving you
all
work.
TV
Yeah,
and film. Sometimes we see TV and film that makes light or doesn't necessarily get into the emotional angst that goes with trying to convey to somebody how you feel. And I say convey because we actually are rubbish at talking about it. And that's sometimes with certain TV shows or films where somebody is able to just say, "This is how I feel about you." I think that's not how it is in real life. We're all absolutely angst ridden. We're terrified that the
yeah,
person we like doesn't like us back. We're analysing everything they say, every look, every phone call and text message, and we're in knots the whole time. And the thought, I have never in my life just been able to turn around to someone and say, well, not yet, maybe one day, but never been able to
yeah,
turn around and say, "This is how I feel about you. I think about you all the time. I dream about you." Well, that sounds a bit weird,
yeah,
but I've never been able to just say that because we're all. It's a dance, isn't it?
yeah,
It's a nobody moves until somebody else will make the first little step. And I think that's what's great. You get that in Pride and Prejudice. They're trying to navigate around each other all the time. And I also think that's quite an English thing. I think the English are, nobody's surprised about that, a little bit more, probably have even more difficulty than some other cultures in expressing their feelings. And again, I think probably that inability to just come out and say how you feel is present in life for me as well, because even when they both individually know how they feel, nobody can figure out for a
yeah.
while how to convey that. And yeah, so I think that's why I think there's so many reasons why Pride and Prejudice is fantastic, and I'll stop there because I could go on.
Yeah, I don't know exactly why
Yeah,
I asked that question, but it's like I always, well, because my mum used to love, well, still loves Pride and Prejudice, and used to watch the video of it, and I'd be like around when I'm in my teenage years, so I've seen the story about 100 times.
yeah.
So I was just interested.
Actually, you're making me want to go and watch it again.
Which version, though? I mean, the one,
Oh, the BBC version.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Well, I
no
mean,
doubt.
that's the one that I've seen, like with Colin Firth in it. If he's
Yeah. Oh, yes.
walking out of
Yeah.
the lake, I don't think was in the original book, so I think that was added in for soft
I think
porn.
they made some good editorial decisions when they
Yeah.
made that BBC version. Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about the process of you writing and publishing the book. Because I know
Yes.
you had a lot of issues with cover designers, and you've obviously had several rounds of editing on it. So talk about like
Mm.
how you actually got the book available on Amazon.
Okay. Yeah. So the writing of the book, in some ways, was now feels like the simplest part of the process.
Yeah,
The book, so I started writing it. I would say I had what I would call a story draft within a month. But I don't want anyone to think that, I'm some sort of super weird. As I say, I had a gap between contracts, so I had the pleasure of writing pretty much all day, every day, and I wrote somewhere between sort of 4,000 and 5,000 words a day most days. Um, and then, and I ended up with a first rough draft of about 65 or so thousand words, and then that was really gappy. So there were a couple of story gaps, but I was starting to see where they were. And then after that, I would say it took me about another 3 or 4 months, because then I was back in work. So it took me another 3 or 4 months to then do the additional writing, go back through it and do my first edit on it to check that the story was
yeah,
complete as I understood it at that time. And then, so around about September last year, I identified an editor that I wanted to work with. And because I was a first, well, yeah, I was then, I was a first time author, I had decided that I would invest in every stage of editing.
yeah,
I just felt that I wanted to put out the best book that I could, and therefore I wasn't going to skimp, because I didn't want people to pick up a half finished product, basically. So I found an editor and I did a manuscript assessment, which was really useful actually in terms of me understanding the arc of the story. And there were a couple of things I had to address there. I had a development edit and then I had a copy edit as well. And that all took, I think that all took longer than I expected. Not so much the editor, so much as me needing to do the work in between. Because it was only ever with the editor, I would say the longest time it was with my editor was probably about 3 weeks. But then when I got it back, it was another 3 or 4 weeks or so. So actually, that process sort of stretched out into the early part of this year. And then I would say the book was done, bar kind of final proofing, etc. The book was done January, February time, and but what I hadn't thought about is that I needed to be looking for a cover designer,
yeah,
because I had it in my head, and I don't know why, but I had it in my head that I needed to have the finished product before I could go and find my cover designer. I really still don't know why. I think I just got fixated on that. And so I'm sitting there with this finished book that I'm now quite keen to get out to people. By the way, at this point, I also have zero. Back in January, I don't think I had a TikTok account. I hadn't told anyone outside my family and a few close friends that I was writing a book. That has improved only slightly.
yeah,
um, but I do have a TikTok account now. But anyway, I thought, well, I have to get a cover. And again, I wanted to get a decent cover for the book, because I hadn't spent all this time giving up my evenings and my weekends, etc., to create this product that, yes, I really loved it. I enjoyed the process, but it had been at the expense of, you have to say no to an awful lot of stuff if you
yeah.
really want to get a book out there. You have to make decisions not to go out the weekends, not to see people sometimes. So I ended up going through, as you made reference to there, I think I went through 5 cover designers. for very different reasons. My first designer, it was my fault. I should have thought more carefully about what I wanted before I appointed her. So what she sent me, I didn't like, but it wasn't really her fault. It was mine. So I just said, look, I will pay you, but I'm going to go another way. Second designer, I really liked. I really liked her work, and then she just stopped responding after she sent me the first proof. I was really happy with it. I wanted to proceed, and she just sort of disappeared. That was really frustrating. And then I approached one or two other people who were just not particularly communicative, and I was getting very nervous because this had already been weeks now.
Mm.
And then eventually, having sort of done a trip around the world, finding designers in different countries, I ended up working with a guy who lives in Blackpool.
Oh,
So, and what was great about my designer is he's very patient, and we were able to have a conversation. Everything else I'd done with the other designers was on messaging platforms and
yeah,
things. And although I still sent the same detailed brief to this designer, we were then able to follow that with a Zoom call, talk it through, and I got a cover that I'm happy with. And I will work with him again because I think that he did a good job. And also, I want my covers to have, at least for these first few books, to have a similar theme, a similar sort of look, a similar
yeah,
style. And then, having done all of that and written the blurb and then formatted the interior of the book and got my page count and got the cover to match up with the page count and everything, I realized I had to get it loaded up onto Amazon. And then I realized that nobody knew about this book because, apart from my mum and my dad and a couple of other people, because I the thing that I would say to new writers, if any new writers
yeah,
are watching this, is it will all take longer than you think.
yeah.
And by that, I don't necessarily just mean the writing side, although that will potentially take longer than you think. I massively underestimated how long each step would take of the rest of the process. And interestingly, I was thinking about it because as I watched weeks slide by, and what I realized is that although I understood the steps to take and I had seen lots and lots of chat in all the different amazing writers groups that I'm in on Facebook and things like that about what the steps were, nobody said, especially when you're starting out, they could take this long. You should allow this much time, or you should build in this much contingency. Because the cover alone, getting that sorted, I think that was the best part of 2 months. And
Mm.
I thought that was going to be a fun fortnight or something. So that's the bit. And also that you can be running some of these processes alongside each other. But because I was working now as well, I was, busy, demanding day job, I had very little time to devote to all of these things that needed doing. And I so wish that I had started social media way back before
Mm.
I was anywhere near publishing the book, because now I'm scrambling to catch up. But at the same time, I think however you do it, your first book is a huge learning curve. That's my learning. That was my journey. Someone else will get other things right and wrong. And that will be their journey. And there's an awful lot that I'm taking into book 2 in terms of the business side of it that is the learning from book 1. So yeah.
Okay, so you've mentioned a book two. When when is that book going to be available? Ish.
Ish.
And
Yeah.
is it a sequel to the first book, or is it a separate book completely?
Good question. Again, a piece of advice that I hope I will follow one day is to write a series.
Yeah, yeah,
But I did try developing a series, and I just couldn't quite get that to stick. So Live for Me, the one that's out now, is a standalone.
yeah.
And Love Getting Even, which is book 2, is also a standalone. And that should be out. I'm gonna nail my colours to the wall and be as specific as saying October.
Ooh.
I think I'm far enough along, and I think from work I did over the weekend, I can see the editing and development schedule. I think it will be out in October, and that is about two people who meet. And this is no spoilers because this is the premise. They meet when they discover that their partners are cheating on them with each other.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
that's how they meet.
yeah.
And then they end up spending time together for reasons that.
Yeah.
explain later. But basically, they refuse to go quietly over the horizon just because their exes have left them. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Sounds interesting. Just from so. Final question, which I
Mhm.
didn't know you had any social media presence, to be honest. So it's like, can you
It's not
tell?
huge.
Can you tell people like how to get in touch with you if they're interested in
Mhm.
talking to you about your books or romance or anything, and also like how people can get hold of like Life of Me and how they can keep in touch with you and find out about your future book.
Oh, yeah, that'd be amazing. So I have a website and lauraivesauthor.com. So
Yeah,
you can go there and you can sign up to my mailing list, which would be amazing. And I don't mail out very often, not more than about once a month, so you won't be
yeah,
bombarded. However, you will then be notified about things like cover reveals, release dates, special discounted codes for getting my books. So it's worth being on there. You can find me on TikTok, Laura Ives Author, and that's really and I am on Instagram as well, but really I'm active on TikTok, so that's the best one. And you can get my book it's in Kindle Unlimited on Amazon, and you can get it as an ebook and as a paperback book on Amazon as well.
okay, that's great to hear. And for anybody who doesn't know what Kindle Unlimited is, um, if you sign up to that, you get like infinite books for $7.99 a month or something like that, don't you?
Yeah, so it's a subscription service, and not all authors, but a lot of authors
Yeah,
put their books into Kindle Unlimited, and then for anyone who's curious, the way authors get paid is we get a kind of an amount per page read.
yeah.
So that's how that works. But for the reader, you can read, especially if you're a voracious reader, then Kindle Unlimited can be quite a good way to get an awful lot of books and good value for money.
So if anybody's a Kindle Unlimited subscriber or who watches this show, just get Laura's book and every day just read an extra page of the book. Little
I know.
0.01p.
And you can't go too fast and just scroll through because Amazon actually learns people's reading speeds.
Yeah,
so that doesn't help us. So yeah, but a page a day would.
yeah. Anyway, thanks so much for everybody
Thank
watching
you.
or anybody watching. And thanks for people who watched it on YouTube in the distant future when no doubt Laura will be an international celebrity for, after her second book hits the big time. So thanks for everybody watching.
Thanks very much, Tim.
This is what God requires.